He didn't walk in like he owned the place. He walked like someone used to being ignored. Slow, careful, shoulders slightly bowed from time and memory. His jacket was old, his boots older, and pinned to his chest, just above his heart, was a bronze star, scratched, dulled, but real. A couple of guys by the jukebox noticed first. One of them snorted, "Look at this guy. Bet he bought that off Craigslist." The other laughed louder. Or maybe he gave it to himself for surviving a cold winter. They laughed like it was nothing, like the man didn't hear. But he did. He heard every word. He just didn't say a thing. Until the door opened behind them, and a man in full dress uniform stepped in. For stars on his shoulders. Silence followed him like a command. If the story reminds you that some things should never be taken lightly, not because of what they are, but because of what they cost, then share it. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where quiet men carry loud legacies. It was just past noon on a Tuesday when he walked into Mason's Grill, a small-town diner that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 80s, where the pie display was more decorative than edible and the blinds always let in just enough light to feel like noon no matter the hour. The kind of place where you know everyone's first name and where no one asks about the one empty chair at every table. The bell over the door gave its usual half-hearted chime, but nobody really looked up, not at first. Just another old man, they figured. Maybe waiting for a social security check, maybe looking for a refill before wandering back to wherever people like him came from. His jacket was worn, not distressed like something bought that way, but earned. Brown canvas, thin at the seams, the left cuff slightly darker like it had caught oil more than once. His pants were plain, boots mismatched in lacing, one dragging subtly with each step. But there was intention in his gait. Not the shuffle of a man lost in time, but the careful, calculated pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going and why. He didn't scan the room, didn't search for a friendly face, just made his way slowly to the counter and claimed the farthest stool from the entrance. The kind that lets your back face the wall and your eyes see every angle of the room. He set down his cap first, gently, then slid onto the stool without a sound. And that's when they saw it, pinned to the left breast of his jacket, dull in the muted light, but unmistakable in its shape. A bronze star, scratched, worn, but real. He didn't touch it, didn't glance at it like some do when they want it noticed. It sat there like it had always belonged. But it did something to the air, something subtle. The waitress, maybe 23, maybe less, walked over, notepad in hand, and hesitated just a second longer than usual. "Just coffee," he said, voice soft, calm, the kind of calm that makes you listen harder. She nodded and poured it fresh. He thanked her, quietly, without eye contact, just enough to be polite. And then, the whispers started. 2 booths back, 2 men in work boots and branded overalls leaned toward each other like boys at recess planning mischief. One nudged the other. "That thing real? Doubt it." The other scoffed. "You can get those online. Whole rack of 'em on eBay. Or at the pawn shop down by 5th. The first one added. "Probably bought it to get a discount somewhere." The laughter wasn't loud. Just low enough to feel safe. Just cruel enough to feel sharp. And the worst part wasn't the joke. It was the tone, the kind people use when they assume you won't fight back. At the counter, the old man didn't react. He stirred sugar into his coffee. Hands steady. Not shaking. Not old. Measured. He took a sip and looked out the window, where traffic crawled past slowly and the flag outside the post office hung at half-mast, limp in the windless afternoon. He didn't blink. Didn't flinch. But if you were watching close, really close, you'd notice his jaw flex just once, and the way his free hand gently closed over the cap resting on the counter beside him. The cap had a unit patch, old, faded, mostly unreadable now, but the embroidery still clung to the threads. 173rd Airborne. 2 seats down, a man in a beige windbreaker paused mid-bite of his burger. He didn't say anything, just stared at the metal. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment but recognition. He knew what he was looking at, and he knew what kind of silence filled a man who wore that metal the way you wear loss. And just then, the door opened again. The bell rang louder this time, clear, sharp, like it remembered what it was made for. And this time, every head turned. The bell above the door gave a sharper ring this time, the kind that cuts through chatter and forks on plates, and makes the whole room turn by instinct. But it wasn't a general yet. Just a delivery kid in a navy hoodie carrying a box of frozen fries, hurrying past the old man like he wasn't even there. The room relaxed again. Tension unregistered but real, and the two men at the booth near the window leaned back in their seats, confidence puffed up from the smirks they thought were clever. One of them, the one with the beard and too much cologne, turned halfway toward the counter and spoke just loud enough to echo off chrome napkin holders. "Hey, old-timer," he said. "That metal real? Or you get it in a cereal box?" The waitress flinched. Not big, just enough for the sugar scoop to hit the counter wrong. She looked at the cook. The cook looked away. The old man didn't move. He didn't look up, didn't answer. He just kept sipping his coffee, slower now, as if each sip was a choice, a decision not to speak. The second man laughed louder. "Come on, man. Just curious. What's the medal for?" "Most push-ups at the senior center." Another chuckle. Another moment where someone should have stopped it. But no one did. Not the manager, who had just stepped in from the back room with a clipboard and a blind eye. Not the waitress, who clearly didn't know if stepping in would make it worse. And not the other diners. Most of them silent, most of them pretending to focus on their food but stealing glances. One eye on the old man, one eye on the men provoking him, all of them unsure whether this was harmless or something deeper. He still didn't speak, but something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he turned his stool just slightly. Not enough to face them, but enough to show that he heard. Enough to show that he chose not to answer. And that choice hit harder than any insult they'd hoped for. Because silence, in the right hands, becomes a mirror. It reflects the smallness of the ones shouting into it. And now they were starting to feel that smallness, they just didn't know how to shut up. The bearded one grinned like a man who thinks he's still winning. "You know, anyone can pin on a star, but it don't mean anything unless you earned it. And you don't exactly look like someone who earned much." Still no response. But now the diner felt different. The man in the windbreaker had stopped chewing. A young mother near the door had shifted her child to the other side of the booth. And the cook had stopped flipping patties, hand resting on the griddle handle, eyes locked on the man at the counter like he was remembering something. Something from a place where coffee came in tins and medals weren't punchlines. The bearded man leaned farther. "You deaf, Grandpa? Or just ashamed to admit you're wearing someone else's honor?" And that was when it happened. The old man stood up. Not fast, not angry, just steady. He placed the coffee cup back on the counter with both hands, aligned the cap beside it, and turned. Slowly, entirely, the diner went dead quiet. No one moved, not even the jukebox. He didn't raise his voice, didn't point, just stared directly at the man who just made the last mistake of his week. His eyes, pale gray, unreadable, held something the other man wasn't ready for. Not rage, not pain. Wait, and just as the silence was about to break, just as someone might have said something too late, the bell rang again. Not sharp, not loud, but different. And this time it wasn't a delivery boy. It was a man in full dress blues, polished shoes, ribbons across the chest, for silver stars on his shoulders. And the moment he stepped through that door, no one was looking at the old man anymore, because the one who came in was looking only at him. The man in dress blues didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He didn't stride in like a movie scene, didn't shout, didn't flash anything. He just walked in like someone who knew exactly where he was, exactly who was watching, and didn't care. His posture was straight, hands still gloved from the cold, the insignia on his chest not polished for attention, but maintained out of respect. He was maybe in his late 60s, sharp, but tired in a way that doesn't show on the face, only in the way a man breathes after seeing too many funerals. He saw the old man at the counter instantly, nodded once, not big, just enough, the kind of nod that says, "I see you, I remember." Then he walked past him, not ignoring but not disturbing, just letting his presence fill the room. That was what changed everything. No one knew his name yet, but they knew the type. The cook leaned out of the kitchen window, eyes narrowing like he was trying to place a face he hadn't seen in 30 years. The waitress blinked twice, lowered the coffee pot, and instinctively pulled her shoulders back, like something inside her just remembered what dignity looked like. The two men who had been mocking the old man had gone quiet the moment the uniform stepped in. Not out of guilt, at least not yet, but because the temperature of the room had shifted, like someone had cracked a window in winter. The man in uniform didn't sit at the counter. He walked to a back booth, where no one could be behind him, set his coat aside, folded his gloves neatly, took a menu, glanced at it, then set it down without reading. He wasn't there to eat. That much was obvious. He was there to watch, and people noticed. The woman near the window, early 40s, laptop open, halfway through typing an email, had stopped mid-sentence and was now watching quietly over her screen. Her father had served Vietnam. Never talked about it, but she'd seen the way he used to flinch at fireworks and sit in silence during parades. She looked at the old man now, and then at the younger ones who had laughed. Her gaze hardened. A teenage boy in a hoodie who'd been scrolling TikTok at the front booth slowly put his phone down, eyes bouncing between the two men, the one with the medal and the one with the uniform. He didn't understand the history, but even he could feel it, that whatever had just happened in this room wasn't part of the lunch special. Then, quietly, the man in the windbreaker, the one who had noticed the medal before, stood up, walked toward the register. Not hurried, not loud, just like a man who had finally decided something. He didn't look at the waitress. He looked at the old man, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A patch, faded, torn at one edge. He placed it gently on the counter beside the old man's coffee cup. "That's from Firebase Anaconda," he said, voice low, steady. 68. "I never earned what you did, but I saw what it took." The diner went still again. The silence was different, heavier, like the room was holding its breath. The old man turned slowly, looked at the patch, then at the man, and nodded once. Not thanks, not acknowledgement, something more ancient than either. Recognition. And that was when the bearded man, the one who had mocked him first, started to shift in his seat. Not dramatically, just a slow, creeping realization that he had misjudged the entire room. That he wasn't the loudest man anymore. And worse, maybe he never had been. The man in dress blues finally spoke, from the back booth. Quiet, firm. "My name is General Ray Wilcox." He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "I served 38 years in uniform, commanded 2 divisions. But none of that would have happened if the man sitting at this counter hadn't pulled me out of a mortar blast in Kabul, 2003. He looked down for a beat, not for drama, but because memory doesn't always come easy. "I lost 3 men that day, but he cared for. One of them was me, and he never asked for anything." He looked up, eyes locking with the entire diner at once. Calm, cold. "So before anyone here questions his medal, maybe ask yourself what you've done with your morning that makes you feel qualified to laugh at a man like that." No one answered. No one moved. And just like that, the balance of the room shifted. The man at the counter was no longer the one people looked down on. He was the reason they all looked up. The silence didn't break with applause. It didn't need to. It broke with something smaller. The soft clink of a spoon dropped into a saucer by a woman near the window, her hand trembling just enough for porcelain to speak what her voice couldn't. She was in her 50s, wore hospital scrubs beneath a cardigan, probably on her lunch break between shifts. Her father had a Bronze Star too. Never wore it. Just kept it in a cigar box in the garage, next to a flag folded tight enough to never breathe again. She stood up, walked slowly toward the counter. Didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She looked at the old man, nodded once, and placed a tiny Polaroid photo beside his cap. A man in uniform holding a baby. "My dad wore one too," she whispered, then walked back to her table and didn't touch her food again. The waitress, who had been frozen this whole time, finally moved. Not dramatically. She just walked back to the register and refilled the old man's coffee. This time, her hand didn't shake. She didn't ask if he wanted cream. She didn't need to. And when she turned away, she reached up and tugged at the little pin on her apron. A shiny enamel logo from the diner's anniversary, and unclipped it without a word. She placed it gently next to the bronze star, as if to say, "This never meant anything. That does." The two younger guys in the booth, they were quiet now. The bearded one had stopped chewing gum. His friend picked at the corner of the table with his nail, suddenly fascinated by the grain in the laminate. Guilt didn't sit heavy on them, not yet, but discomfort did. And sometimes that's the first crack. The kind that comes not from being punished, but from realizing you were seen. At the far end of the room, a teenage boy in a Letterman jacket stood up slowly, phone still in hand. He hadn't been recording, not yet, but now he was. Not to go viral, not for likes, just to make sure someone else saw what he saw. That sometimes the strongest people in the room wear no expression at all. He angled the camera downward, not at faces, but at hands. The old man's resting flat beside the photo, the patch from Firebase Anaconda, the now empty coffee cup, the untouched metal. He zoomed in just enough, then hit record. Outside, across the street, a city bus had paused longer than necessary at the light. The driver was looking through the wide window toward the diner. A few passengers had turned their heads too, maybe noticing the stillness, the cars slowing to pass, the way people entering the parking lot didn't get out of their vehicles. Not yet. And inside, it kept growing. The cook leaned out again. His voice, usually too gruff for any emotion, cracked ever so slightly when he said, "I didn't know that was you." The old man didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't flinch. He just stared ahead, eyes unfocused, like he wasn't even in the diner anymore, like his body was there, but his mind was back in a place where dust and blood blurred together and metals didn't mean anything if the man next to you didn't make it home. Then the manager stepped out from the back. He wasn't there earlier, hadn't seen it unfold. All he saw was a full diner, a general in the back booth, a man with a medal at the counter, and everyone standing too still for comfort. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, loud, sharp. And that's when the general, who had stayed quiet all this time, stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just with the kind of presence that makes even the air hold its breath. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The way he stood, calm, slow, perfectly still, made everyone in the room go quiet without being told. The manager froze halfway through adjusting his belt. The bearded guy in the booth shifted in his seat like his spine had forgotten how to sit straight. The general stepped toward the counter, stopped about a yard behind the old man, and looked not at him, but at everyone else. "This man saved my life," he said. Simple, like a sentence he'd said 100 times in his head but never out loud. In Afghanistan, 2003, he was off duty, volunteered for a convoy run he didn't need to be on. I detoured through the second truck. My driver was dead. I was trapped. And this man? He paused, now looking at the waitress, the manager, and finally the two younger men near the window. Ran 40 meters through open fire, with nothing but a sidearm and a fire extinguisher. Pulled me out. My back was burned. My leg shattered. He didn't leave. Held me until dust-off landed. No one said a word. He looked down now at the bronze star still pinned crookedly on the man's jacket. Not for show, but because the fabric underneath was too thin to hold it properly. They offered him a medal. He refused, said it wasn't about that. The old man didn't turn, didn't react, just stared straight ahead, shoulders tight, as if remembering that moment was something he trained himself not to do. The general kept speaking. He didn't even use his real name. Went by Boone. Took early retirement. Disappeared. I spent years wondering what happened to him. He turned now, fully facing the old man. And today, I find him sitting here, in a place where people think they're allowed to laugh at him. Still, the old man Boone said nothing, but his fingers closed gently around the coffee cup, as if anchoring himself. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was raw, like someone just pulled back a curtain and let the cold in. The manager stepped forward. "General, we didn't know." "That's the problem," the general said, voice even. "Too many people don't know who's sitting right next to them. Too many forget that not all heroes talk loud. Some of them just want coffee and to be left alone. At that moment, the boy in the Letterman jacket, still holding his phone, lowered it slowly. Not because he was done recording, but because he didn't want to capture the next part. He just wanted to be part of it. The waitress stepped forward too. Her voice cracked. "Sir, is there anything we can do to—" Boone finally spoke. One line. Calm. "You can stop calling me sir. I haven't earned that in a long time." The general didn't correct him. He just nodded, lips tight, eyes suddenly glossy in the light. And then, something unexpected happened. A man from the corner booth, silent until now, mid-40s, denim shirt, bald, stood up and pulled a small item from his wallet. A photograph, folded in half. He walked over, placed it gently next to Boone's coffee. It was an old image. A young Marine, muddy, arms around two others, smiling in the sand. "My brother," the man said quietly. "He was in that convoy too. You pulled him out second. He didn't make it, but he made it long enough to say goodbye to Mom. You gave us that. She never forgot." Boone looked at the photo. For the first time, his jaw clenched. The man didn't wait for thanks, just gave him a firm nod and walked back. And now the room wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Not because a hero had been revealed, but because they realized they'd almost let him leave again. Unseen, unknown, forgotten. It started with something barely anyone noticed. The cook stepping out from behind the pass, wiping his hands on a towel like it was any other day. He didn't say anything, just walked over to the counter, leaned in beside Boone, and placed a clean white plate in front of him. Eggs, toast, bacon, no ticket, no bill. Just breakfast like it should have been hours ago. Boone glanced at it, then at the cook. They didn't exchange a word, but the nod they shared said everything. Two men who understood that sometimes the best apology isn't a sentence. It's service. Next came the waitress. She took off her apron, folded it with both hands like it was suddenly something worth folding, and placed it on the counter. Then, with a quiet breath, she turned to the general and said, "Would you mind if I bought his next meal?" The general didn't smile. He didn't need to. "Only if I don't beat you to it." Someone else stood up. The woman in scrubs. She walked back toward the counter, pulled a Sharpie from her pocket, and, without asking, wrote something on a napkin. Then she gently tucked it under Boone's coffee cup. A few moments passed before anyone saw what it said. "My father earned one too.
I'm sorry I forgot."
And then, slowly, like a tide turning without fanfare, the entire energy of the diner shifted. The man who had mocked Boone the loudest, the bearded one, stood up, eyes lowered. He didn't speak, didn't try to explain. But before leaving, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and laid it next to the medal on the counter. Then he walked out, not because it made things right, but because leaving was the only decent thing left for him to do. The general stepped forward now, not as a figure of authority, but as a man bearing witness. He stood beside Boone, eyes scanning the room. "We don't always know who we're looking at," he said, voice firm but quiet. "We see age, clothes, posture, but we don't see years. We don't see loss. We don't see how many people a man like this carried." While the world kept walking, he turned to Boone. "Today we see it. And maybe that's why the teenager finally stood up from the front booth and did the one thing that no one expected. He walked to the front door, flipped the open sign around, and locked it from inside, then turned and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He finishes his meal, then we open again." No one objected, not even the manager, especially not the manager. Outside, a few customers pulled on the door, confused, then looked through the window and saw the scene. They didn't knock, they just stepped back, because even from the sidewalk they could feel it. This wasn't a restaurant anymore. This was a moment, and it didn't belong to commerce. It belonged to respect. Boone took a bite of toast, slowly, like a man who had eaten alone for too long and almost forgot what it felt like to be allowed to stay. And in that silence, Not one person looked away, not because he was wearing a medal, but because now they knew what it cost. Boone was halfway through his eggs when headlights began stacking up outside the diner. Not screeching to a halt, not flashing, just quiet, idling engines pulling into spaces like pieces falling into place on a board only some could see. At first, no one noticed. The general had stepped aside, now sitting across from Boone, quietly watching the room like a man making sure no one forgot this moment. Then someone inside the diner pointed out the window. That's a lot of trucks, a gray Tacoma, a dark green F-150, a beat-up Dodge with a bumper sticker that read, "Once a Marine." They weren't government-issued. They weren't black SUVs or armored vans. But everyone who saw them knew exactly what they were. Veteran trucks, service plates, unit patches on rear glass, stickers that only get there if you've earned them. One by one, the doors opened. Slowly, men stepped out. Some women, too.
No uniforms.
Just jeans, jackets, some walking with canes, some walking like they'd never stopped marching. They didn't talk, didn't huddle. They just walked toward the diner like they belonged to it, like it had called them. Inside, the boy who'd flipped the sign stepped back, unsure what to do. The general stood again and nodded. "Open it," he said. The boy unlocked the door. The first man who entered was broad-shouldered, black jacket, silver beard, ball cap that simply read, "Desert Storm." He didn't say hello. He walked straight to Boone, stopped beside him, and gave a slow salute. Not theatrical, not for show, just muscle memory. Boone looked up. For the first time that day, something in his eyes broke. Not a tear, just the kind of look a man gets when someone finally says, "I was there too." The man dropped his hand, reached into his pocket, pulled out a single ribbon, folded, pressed between two fingers. "You dropped this," he said, then left it beside the coffee cup. Behind him, a woman stepped forward. Her voice was raspy, throat tight. "My uncle talked about you. Never thought you were real. But he said you were the last one carrying ammo that day, when everyone else ran out." She didn't ask to sit. She just stood behind him, like a guard. Another came in, then another, a full row of them lining the wall. Not one holding a phone, not one looking around. All of them focused on one thing. A man finishing breakfast in a room that had finally learned how to hold silence the right way. The general stepped aside, letting them fill the space. Boone didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just sat there, quiet, shoulders no longer hunched, jaw a little looser, and somehow younger. The manager, standing awkwardly near the coffee station, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should," but his words trailed off, because he knew there was no room for business in this moment. No room for menus or refills or receipts. The cook walked out with a new pot of coffee, poured a cup for Boone, then started down the line of veterans, one by one.
No chart. No clipboard.
Just refills for those who had carried more than most would ever understand. By 9:45 a.m., every table was full. No one talked. No one needed to, because everyone there knew. Some mornings, a man doesn't just get a meal. He gets something back that the world tried to take from him. Dignity, place, and this time, he didn't have to ask for it. The diner opened again the next day.
No headlines. No ceremony.
Just the smell of coffee, eggs on the griddle, the same bell above the door. But something had shifted. The counter stool where Boone sat, the one by the window, stayed empty. Not by rule, just by agreement, unspoken. The waitress placed a fresh cup of coffee there at 6:30 sharp. No one touched it. Around 7 o'clock, someone left a folded newspaper next to it. Front page turned down. Like always, no name on it, no message, just ritual. Outside, the parking lot filled a little earlier than usual. Not with customers necessarily, but with people who parked, turned off their engine, and just sat for a few minutes, looking through the window, not staring, just acknowledging. The cook, who'd never liked small talk, started asking older men how they liked their eggs. Not because he needed to know, but because it gave them a reason to be seen. A high schooler named Drew, who'd filmed the moment but never posted it, started coming in every Saturday morning, helping bus tables without pay. When asked why, he just said, "Someone fed us all something real last week. Feels right to clean up." The booth nearest the door got a new plaque. Not metal, just carved wood, mounted quietly between two coat hooks. It read, "Some service is invisible, but it leaves a mark." At the VFW hall down the road, attendance doubled. Old men who hadn't spoken to each other in years, fractured by pride, guilt, or just life, started showing up again. Not for beer, not for bingo, just to sit in the same room, to not disappear. Even the bearded man, the one who'd made the worst joke, came back. Not right away, but a week later, he walked in, stood at the counter without ordering, and laid down a small cardboard box. Inside was a bronze star replica, still in plastic. He left it without a word and walked out. No one touched that box. They just placed it behind the counter. And somehow everyone knew it wasn't for Boone. It was for the next man who walks in with the real thing, and no one bothers to ask why. At the high school, a social studies teacher rewrote part of her curriculum, made room for a unit on quiet history. Moments not in textbooks, told not through speeches but through shoulders, through silence. And at least once a week, she'd end class with a single question. Who might we be ignoring today? And the town, this quiet, forgettable town, started doing something remarkable. They started listening before speaking. Not because they were told to, but because one morning in a diner, they almost forgot a man who had carried them all. And someone had to remind them, real valor doesn't ask to be noticed. It just hopes not to be erased. He didn't come back the next week, nor the one after. Some thought maybe he'd moved on, found another town, another stool where people left him be. Others feared the truth, that life had finally caught up with the man who had outrun it longer than most ever could. No one wanted to ask, but everyone felt it. Then one morning, 2 weeks after the silence returned, the door opened at 6:25 a.m. Not Boone, but the same old duffel bag he always carried. Now in the hands of a young man, early 30s, clean shave, military posture you couldn't fake. He didn't speak when he entered, just walked to the counter, gently placed the bag on Boone's usual seat, and turned to face the room. Everyone stopped. Forks, voices, even the radio cut into a softer static. The man cleared his throat. Samuel Boone passed last night, quietly, alone but not without peace. He wanted no funeral.
No flag.
Just, he glanced down at the duffel. This brought here. No one moved, but the room breathed differently. He reached in and pulled out a small item. A dog tag, weathered, worn, edges rubbed nearly smooth. He placed it on the counter. Then the medal, Boone's bronze star, still crooked, still dull. It clinked next to the cup that no one had dared touch. And last, a handwritten note, folded neatly, yellowed like it had been written years ago. He didn't read it, just placed it face up. The waitress leaned forward, eyes blurred. She whispered the words aloud. If they laugh again, just let them. They haven't seen what we've seen. Boone, the man nodded once. He said this place gave him something he didn't expect. Not respect, not redemption, just a seat. And that was enough. He stepped back. He wanted the stool left empty, if possible. The manager nodded.
No hesitación.
Always, one by one, patrons approached. Not to cry, not to speak, just to leave something, a photo, a service patch, a coin, a folded flag pin, a drawing from a child that said, "Thank you, Mr. Sam." By noon, the entire counter space had become a kind of shrine. Not polished, not organized, just real, like Boone. And later that night, when the lights were dimmed and the door was locked, the cook stayed behind, alone. He poured a black coffee, placed it at the stool, sat opposite it for a while, then stood, saluted once. Sharp, no dramatics, and flipped the closed sign around. He paused before turning out the lights, whispered softly to no one, "Next time we'll know better." And from that night on, the coffee never stopped coming. Every morning, same time. No one ever sat there again. And somehow no one needed to. Time moved on, as it always does. The seasons shifted. People came and went. But the corner stool by the window at Mason's Grill never changed. Stayed there, empty but never forgotten. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, the coffee was poured. Same brand, same cup.
No sugar. No cream.
No questions. The waitress who used to forget orders now checked that cup first. The cook who once never looked up now wiped that counter down with both hands. The boy who flipped the sign that day, he joined the Navy, came back 2 years later in uniform. First thing he did was walk to the stool, salute it, and sit down next to it. Not in it. No one ever did. Visitors would ask, who was he? And the locals would say, he didn't want to be known. That's why we remember him. The plaque beneath the window was simple, reserved, not for rank, not for fame, but for silence that carried weight. No names, just meaning. Sometimes strangers would leave a coin or a folded note. Once, a woman drove 3 towns over to sit across from the stool and pray. Didn't say who she was, but when she left, the napkin she'd written on stayed behind. It said, my son came home, yours didn't. I see you. And somehow that napkin stayed there for weeks. No one moved it, not even the wind. The people of the town changed little by little. They paused more often before judging. They asked before assuming. They offered a seat before being asked. Because one man, one quiet, nameless man with a crooked medal and a straighter back than most, had reminded them what dignity looks like when it's worn, not spoken. No camera ever caught his full story. No reporter ever asked for an interview. But every person who walked into that diner after that day left knowing something they hadn't known before. Sometimes the loudest legacy is the one that never asked to be heard. And in the quiet hum of morning light, when the first customer arrived and the town hadn't fully woken yet, you could still feel it. Not grief, not guilt, just something soft, something strong, like a man still sitting there, watching over a town that finally learned how to see. If this story made you pause even for a second, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, not for numbers, not for trends, but for the quiet men and women whose medals weigh more than words. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where we remember the ones the world almost forgot.